You're listening to Conversations with Peter Timothy Cooper. And we're going to be talking about a very interesting question. Well, first, let me introduce my guest. Albina, just tell us where you're from, where you live now, what do you do, those sort of things.
Well, I'm coming from Russia, from the island of Sakhalin, where I lived since I was 3. I lived in Sakhalin Island for a couple of decades, and then I lived in Moscow last few years before I met my English husband and married and went to England.
At least we'll start by trying to answer this question, which we discussed before we started. And that was a comparison between Britain today and Soviet-era Russia, Soviet Russia. Now, you said that you moved out. You just say you moved out, Albina, during the Glasnost and Perestroika and not Brezhnev, I got the wrong. And what's his name again?
Gorbachev and Yeltsin, Yeltsin,
It fell out of my brain. Yes, and Gorbachev time. So, and that was the 80s, wasn't it? So up until then, you were living there, and it's Soviet Russia we're talking about.
Yeah, Soviet Union, it was.
Soviet Union. Now, you were out on an island near Japan, though.
Yes, I was.
The island you mentioned earlier, but still under the same system and under the same rule.
Well, was territory of Russia.
Yes, there you are. So let's do that comparison. So if you're listening along to this, just play along with this for a moment and imagine that we're in the same time now as Soviet Russia. So we're comparing two. I know it's two different times, but we're going to compare something about them, put them side by side, and that is freedom. How free are you? So how free are just your average person? Is just your average person today in Britain compared with your average person in the Soviet Union in that era? So we're talking about the 70s and 80s, I guess. Would that be right? Yeah. Okay, so...
Well, in Russia we had lots of things free at that time. For example, we had free education, free health system, which you have the same here.
Yeah, so...
Well, you still have, however, there is lots of things, for example, unavailable here. Like I spoke to many Russians who agree with me that, for example, waiting lists here didn't exist in Russia, in NHS, like here in NHS,
So there's
if you're ill,
freedom of access to things like health services, health services, and education. So how does that compare?
Education surely was one of the best in the world, because Russian government put a lot of money into development of children. We had free sports things, free ballet, free chess clubs, free If you live in a big city, there was no problem getting access. And I remember, because I came from a small village in Sakhalin Island and visiting my mom's sister. And she said to my mom, Albina is very talented. Why don't you leave her here? And I put her in an art school, special, But my mom didn't want, obviously, to separate with me, so...
Yes, okay. But the point you mentioned there, because education was very important. It was a high standard. Now, certainly in Britain today, so we're talking about Britain today, education is free at point of use. Obviously, you pay tax, though. So
you pay now for student fees horrendous amount.
No, I'm talking about in schools.
In schools, yeah.
In schools, so up to the age of now 18, you get education, and you don't pay you don't pay at point of use. Of course, you've got more taxation because there are schools, and national insurance, which is another tax. So in Soviet Russia in the Soviet Union, at that time, were there high taxes? Was that your impression?
No, taxes were very low. Taxes were very low, and the payment for the apartments, people mostly lived in apartments, and people wanted to live in apartments because houses were not as good as English houses, right?
Yeah, that's a difference, but a difference that's not. It's a difference in style, I guess, or way of living, but not in terms of freedom, which is.
That's what you can guess access. In terms of living level of living,
So,
it was lower, of course, than here.
So
but then you have to look deep. Why it was like this?
Yes. Okay. Well, now let's. What we're looking at there. So, standard of living you're talking about. Now, I guess it's sort of it's related to freedom because if you have a higher standard of living, you're more free to do things because you've got more excess wealth, haven't you? So you would say that compared to today, remember?
Yeah.
Was it lower then in Russia? In Soviet Union?
Russians lived more in cramped conditions, because we suffered far, far more during the wartime, and we lost so much infrastructure as well as Russia was rebuilding itself from scratch, looking after the revolution. Russia was agricultural country, so it had to build accommodations for industrial cities very quickly. So accommodation wasn't as good quality as British accommodation. Yeah. But then you see, we didn't live in debt. Everyone here, you live in a better conditions, but you're not free because you're paying a lot of money through your nose, and you're dependent on. There is no freedom in that when you pay through your nose.
No. Well, no. I agree. So
and you're terrified to lose your. You can't say anything because you're afraid if you.
Let's just break for a moment and say, well, what do we mean by freedom or being free? Then, what is it?
That's
what is it
that very, very good question, because if you define the freedom, because many people in Russia while we lost what we had because they misunderstood what freedom is.
A lot of people
because
in the West,
they thought they can have Western styles and Western debauchery, whatever, which was allowed here freely, which wasn't in Russia, but was restricted there, behavior, moral behavior. Lots of things which, if you call that freedom, but I'd rather live in a restricted freedom where you could maintain moral standards.
Okay, so are you that? So in our definition of freedom that we're going to use now to compare, are we going to exclude this freedom of lifestyle?
Yeah, we're not going to go into all details.
I mean,
because we don't have freedom even to speak about it because it's 6 years in prison,
What is that? For what?
In Britain.
6 years in prison for what? Well, this today.
Well, it can be misinterpreted if you talk, for example, about certain minority groups.
Okay, so you were talking about sexual freedom.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. So your perception.
So I already feel that I'm not free.
Yes, you feel you're not free. So let's define it. So there's freedom of lifestyle.
Yeah.
We could exclude that in our comparison, but maybe we shouldn't. So there's freedom to live how you want. Right?
Yeah.
There's freedom to say what you want.
Here? No.
I'm saying these are concepts.
Oh yeah.
Which we could include in freedom. Freedom to do to live in the lifestyle you want. Yeah. So thinking especially of your sexual lifestyle.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, but also maybe including
freedom to achieve your potential.
Freedom to achieve your potential. Yeah. So
freedom to raise your children, not worry about them. Freedom to that's big thing. For the parents.
There's two things. One is there's a sort of freedom of expression, freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And then there's the freedom for things that you do, the way that you live. And I suppose you could also include in it freedom of movement. Can you move wherever you want? Can you live wherever you want?
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should include? I mean, perhaps those are the major areas. We also had freedom of access to, what would you call it? Utilities and education,
standards of life. Yeah.
And I suppose entertainment, that sort of thing. So if we go through them in terms. So today in Britain, if we talk about sexual lifestyle, your orientation, your lifestyle, it is said that there's an impression that it's almost like a double think, isn't it? There's an impression that you can live how you want, and that no one has the right to
criticize,
criticize
or to open your mouth and speak out against that.
But if
so there's no freedom of speech.
Yeah. So but just talking about the freedom of expression, freedom of lifestyle, freedom to live how you want. So you could be homosexual, heterosexual, live in. You could live in a sexual relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And there's no anyway legal problems with doing that. Was it the same in the Soviet Union? Were people free to live? Say, could homosexual couples live together freely?
I guess I never met homosexuals in my life.
Ah, right. Okay, so you wouldn't know.
We know in our village was one guy who was, quirky, kind of like everybody kind of mocked him. Like behind his back, people talked about him, and there was a case where he invited someone, probably he was a homosexual, because he invited a guy to his house, and that was talk of the village. He invited him to his house and offered to have a wash, and then he said basically, and he came out naked, and so that was some kind of strange thing happening, and the guy just beat him on his face and walked out, because he wasn't
he wasn't interested. No, but that's sort of
slapped him on his face. Yeah,
I think so. We've sort of defined our freedom in those different ways: freedom to live how you want, freedom to speak, and then to speak out how you want, and then freedom of access to things, to things that you need and want. But in each particular case, there is also there are also rather two different ways of looking at it. One is socially, what's it like? What's acceptable like? So therefore, in this case, homosexuality, certainly in the case who hit him in his face, that wasn't acceptable to him.
Yeah.
But I think in that particular case, it's not just about being socially acceptable. He was forcing himself upon him, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He invited him under the pretext of having a friendship, have a drink,
and then
have a just chat, like male chat, and the guy just realized he just was in somebody's house under totally wrong pretenses, and he just tried to get the way out.
Yes, there's limits in freedom in that way, socially speaking. You shouldn't do that, should you? And if he had actually then forced himself upon him, that would have been assault.
Yeah.
In Britain today, that's assault. So presumably it would have been the same in Russia, in the Soviet Union at that time. So... when I came
to England, and I was shocked, my ex-husband, kept saying, look at them, they are homosexual. Look at them, they are homosexual. Yeah. I said, how do you know? For me, two men walking together never was associated in my brain. And you know what? I was 23 or 24. I was already, 24. Yeah, it was in university. When I first time heard the word lesbian.
Yes.
That's because people told why she doesn't have a boyfriend.
Yes.
Oh, she must have been a lesbian. And I said, that was just, I didn't even know what this lesbian means.
So you, because of that, you're not really aware, say, of the of any
we had a very innocent childhood,
So you wouldn't be aware of the legal situation. In Britain, you see, it used to be that homosexuality itself was illegal. And then we went through lots of changes, and now it's pretty much the same, treated the same as heterosexual sex in terms of the legality of it, what age you're allowed to start and that sort of thing. It's pretty much the same, not quite the same, but it's pretty much the same. And we now have, of course, same-sex marriage, which is seen as an extension of freedom. I would argue that it isn't, but if you did regard that as a freedom now that we have now, that's something that certainly wasn't around in the Soviet Union
Yeah.
in the
You see,
1970s and 80s.
now when I become Christian, and you're Christian, so you would agree with me that we can define freedom from godly point of view or
Yes.
from devil point of view.
Yeah.
Because devil was offering to Adam and Eve, you'll be free, you will be try that. But God put barriers for us. For example, you are free to touch the fire, and just spread the fire coals around the house. But what good is that? You'll burn your whole house. Yeah. It's good to be contained in a certain area. And so when you're married, you contain your sex life to
Yes.
what God designed.
Yeah.
Because He's a creator. He designed us this way. And this is my view.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I agree totally with you. And I think that I just put into it the idea of sexual freedom as a measure some people use to measure freedom, but it isn't really freedom, because what you're doing is you're
enticing to sin according to the Bible.
Yeah, which then enslaves you. It's a bit like say you're free to inject yourself with heroin. But then that enslaves you. It's not a good thing to do.
Exactly. So is that a good freedom? No. The freedom when you have some certain limitations which are good for you. Mm-hmm. Because when you're young, you don't understand many things. And how many children are enticed now into all sorts of things? I mean, especially comparing life for children. Because most of my life in Russia was during the childhood. Therefore, I compare what I see for my children happening or for people around. And my big worry was happening to the youth.
So just freedom as a child then, in Britain today, legally there's freedom. A child can walk around and go wherever they like in the country. But in practice, they're seen as being very much in danger. There's a fear of them.
It's a nanny state here, yeah?
Whereas in Soviet Russia, or in the Soviet Union, where you were living, you felt free, did you?
Well, think about my life. My parents working all the time, that Russian government encouraged women to work.
Right.
Which is probably not such a good thing, However, instead of that, it's organized very good system of schooling.
Right.
And nurseries, which was very good. And there was a safety. There was a safety which we would go to forest by ourselves, picking up mushrooms or berries. Mm-hmm. We would just play ourselves, and there was some drama classes after school. I would go
So we
visiting any friend I wanted to, without ever thinking about cars or being knocked down or whatever.
That we're comparing Soviet Russia to Britain today.
Yeah.
Just I'm reminding the listener as well. So if they're remembering their childhood in Britain or America, that's not what we're doing. We're comparing Britain today with that. And certainly children, parents of young children don't feel free to let their children go out. Certainly they wouldn't let them go out into the woods by themselves, I wouldn't have thought, these days. So that's a freedom that we don't have. Partly through fear, I guess. There's no law stopping you doing it, but you wouldn't do it. And but in Soviet Russia, you and in your island where you lived, in the Soviet Union, you didn't feel that pressure at all. Your parents didn't keep you locked up in the home. You could go out.
Never. We didn't even had. We haven't been even locking the door properly. I mean, well, everybody knew that. Just they put keys under the carpet, under the rug in front of the door. But it just occasionally, but sometimes it didn't bother locking, So it's
no. I think there's another 2 points where I think that in Britain we feel we have freedom. I just want to compare it. And one of them is freedom of speech. Now, do you feel that there was more freedom of speech in the Soviet Union? Back when you were there in the 70s and 80s, than there is in Britain today?
In some ways, it depends what you're talking about,
Yeah.
I was lucky because I was living in times of Brezhnev, which was a very benevolent time.
Benevolent time, okay.
Because people used to, they were not persecuted for, there was lots of funny stories about the leaders and, about Brezhnev and whatever, he was kind of quite benevolent, I would say, yeah.
I remember back, just moving over to my impression of him from here, is that for years people were claiming he'd already died, long before he was dead.
Oh, really? I never heard about that.
There was a
But
strong,
they had
there was a
lots
strong
of-
belief because,
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't exactly the most expressive of people.
People mocked him a lot.
Yeah, and so
Because
people
of-
say, no, he looks like he's already dead. They're just holding him up.
Yeah, I mean, shall I tell you one of the funny stories
Yes, go
we heard in childhood, I remember. Well, Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev, he comes to meet Margaret Thatcher.
Yes.
And people give him a piece of paper to read. It's just like Biden nowadays,
Yes.
with instructions. And he says, "Dear Indira Gandhi," and Indira Gandhi was a leader of India, you
Yes.
know. And people whispering to him, saying, "No, this is Margaret Thatcher." And he just look at the piece of paper, says, "Dear Indira Gandhi," and they said, "Listen, this is Margaret Thatcher." He says, "Okay." Look again at the piece of paper, says, "Dear Indira Gandhi." I said, "No, this is Margaret Thatcher." And he says, "But here's written Margaret Thatcher. Oh, it's written Indira Gandhi." So he's only did what is written, you know.
Yes. I thought you were going to say, he said, Indira Gandhi, this is Margaret Thatcher, meaning himself. But anyway.
No. He
didn't
just
say that.
only read what it says
It
and
would only
believed
read
what
what
it
it
said.
Which is similar to the thing where President Biden read out some quote and then said, end quote, repeat the line, which was the instruction to him, not to the not meant to be read out. So during the Brezhnev era, you felt, which is your era there was freedom to mock the government, including him.
Yes, it was much more, I guess, than in Stalin time, when I heard that the people were put in camps for wrapping up like whatever you buy, like fish, whatever in the shop, in the newspaper with portrait of Stalin, which was basically in every newspaper. So I don't know how true is that as well.
Yes. But during the time that you remember, which, as you say, mainly the Brezhnev era, and you left during the time of Gorbachev, that you didn't feel there was, or you didn't notice anyway, anything to stop you from just saying whatever you wanted.
No, I didn't notice anything that nobody stopped me to say what I wanted. However, I noticed the lack of freedom only when I fell in love with a French guy. When I was 21.
Right. So there's some. What was the restriction there then?
Yeah, because I couldn't go abroad. He invited me to come and visit him. We had just love by correspondence, basically, because we met in Khabarovsk, and then he wanted to marry me. But my life, my personal life, basically was, you can say, ruined because of Russian government wouldn't let me go out. And out of the country, because they knew through my correspondence what the nature of our relationship.
Was there a general restriction on leaving the country, or was it specifically you couldn't leave?
I specifically couldn't, because my cousin went easily, because she had no relationships there.
Okay, yes.
So she went, no problem.
So
but
my question would be then
that I might stay there.
No, but how did they know about the content of your correspondence?
Oh, when I met him, and I was just sharing with some lady, and she told me, Albina, be prepared that you will be checked. Your letters will be checked, and they'll know everything about it. And there was some kind of people who were called stukachi, which means person who is a report on you, grassing, whatever. No.
Yes, I know what you mean.
They go on
you. Yes.
They were. So I was prepared to welcome one in my life like this, just to see. And indeed, so suddenly, like when I was working as a artist at that time for one oil and gas industry, where they needed like to write political slogans or whatever. That was my job at that time. And he knocks at my studio and asks, "Where's Albina?" And I just explained. No, he didn't ask for Albina. Sorry, he asked for someone else.
Yes.
And I knew who he is because I just, looking at him, I realized this is the person who is going to, and I thought it's better I know that person rather than they send someone whom I wouldn't know, because I was warned that I would be watched. And so I said, we started conversation. I said, I don't know what this house is, but you were welcome to have a cup of tea. So he was so relieved. And then he stole my diary, he stole my poetry book. And I went to the KGB and I said to them, look, you send me this guy.
Yes.
And he was just total amateur. He was just really ridiculous, and he stole this and that. Can you please return it? And they said, no, we never send anyone,
Yes.
I said, come on, don't be just naive, He was asking all the questions, like he was pretending that he wants to immigrate abroad, and was tapping on me, like saying, like, maybe I really want to, I hate this country, I want to get out. I knew that it was just set up for me to say these words. I also want to immigrate,
Yes.
And I just say, why are you not happy, because I was happy in Russia. I genuinely said, why you want to immigrate, And anyway, so they said, never happened, he's not, I said he was telling me he's a pilot, he's a liar because, and next morning he comes knocking at my studio in a pilot uniform. I said, you said you're on holidays. Why are you wearing? Oh, I was urgently called to work. So, and he's standing sheepishly in the doorway, and I didn't want to invite him because I just turned away and I just continued working.
Yes.
Oh, so you don't want me to come anymore? I said, no, but it's your business. If you want to come, you're welcome. Have a cup of tea, but I said, I think you don't want to come and visit you. I said, it's up to you. So when he left, I found he sneaked these 2 books onto my shelf.
Oh, had he? All right, he brought them back.
So, but I knew I surely didn't put it there because I never kept them. There was art material on that shelf.
You see, now it's interesting because you had that sort of attention. Now, if that happened in Britain at that time, at the same time you're talking about, that would have been a huge story. And if the government were even remotely involved in possibly, a police officer possibly taking something from your home, he would have been hauled over the coals. But you see,
the British government, and not only British government, it's the world government. We're talking about the elite globalists. Far more clever than Russian. They're amateurs compared because they set up Facebook and they know everything about you.
That's what I was comparing then, the 70s and 80s.
So
but in Britain today, because we use digital communication, I'm sure that
they know everything about you.
In the past, there was such it was almost like a holy thing. You must not touch anyone's mail. And so if it were found that anyone had touched your mail, including the government, whatever, it would have, it was just seen, it is just wrong. And but now, because they've gone digital, as you say, things like Facebook, which garner all your information, they can use it however they want. This is, now I'd be surprised if the government didn't know.
I'd rather KGB check on my email rather than what's happening now.
So the comparison we have, which is meant to be Britain today with Russia, they certainly do know, and then the police these days in Britain are actually policing your opinions. And recording things that aren't crimes as hate speech. And so but after what you said, I was going to say Britain is worse, but I think that's about the same, isn't it? If they can criticise you for something you didn't really want to do, which was leave the country and never come back. That's what they were thinking.
No, they were not criticised. They just didn't want me to leave the country because they
thought
there was a high chance I might stay there because there was a love affair,
but in Britain today, if you wanted to do that, there'd be no restriction. So that's a difference the other way, isn't it? That's what I'm saying. Britain today wouldn't stop you leaving they wouldn't even. It's not that they wouldn't be able to. I think they probably wouldn't be able to.
They-
Legally.
what they're setting up now, we just see what's happening now with all this pandemic and everything. They're setting up so people wouldn't be able to travel at all.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah. I see that, but that's.
And already, you go with this vaccine or whatever, there's no travel like.
But just on that particular issue, can I leave the country and go and marry someone in another country? Say if you're in Britain today, you can. I'm just trying to do
Yes,
a direct.
yeah.
I'm arguing the case for
Yeah,
Britain
of course,
today.
of course, yeah.
So,
but then again,
that's a
I
freedom.
look at the whole situation philosophically now, because the Lord's will was, had I been married to this man, I might have never come to Christ, because I wouldn't have a need probably, because you come often in despair. Also, being badly treated by my ex-husband, so it made me probably search more for the Lord than I would have been.
Yes.
Yeah,
well, these things, I can see that, but it's in terms of freedom of Russia. Then, it's in that particular area, it's less. But the restrictions that were put on Britain during the lockdown,
exactly.
I think greater than in Soviet Russia. So, during your time,
oh yes,
in Soviet Union, were you ever confined to your home?
Oh no.
There you are. That's
and
a
we
huge
could travel
difference.
around. Russia is huge, so we traveled around. Many. I've been in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, Uzbekistan. I've been in Novosibirsk, in Moscow, Leningrad. I traveled a bit. Yaroslav.
So that's a freedom that Britain
Sochi,
today. I think we can still say it's not there because. It's been done now. There is now a precedent for locking people in their homes, and we were not allowed to leave. I mean, I'm not saying everyone obeyed it though. Supposedly, you were not allowed to leave your home other than for an hour each day during the lockdowns, apart from for essential work. Now, my work as a vicar counted as essential work, or at least I counted it as such. I don't know if it was, but. You were not allowed to touch people, if you remember, which is a ludicrous thing. So in the Soviet Union, that wasn't the case. Forbidden to touch people. So we've lost a lot of our freedoms.
Well, obviously, what happened during pandemic, it's so outrageous. It's a limitation of freedom beyond belief. And the censorship is beyond belief too. So
I mean, you see, it depends. I mean, it's interesting about what you think about freedom. There's an assumption in Britain that we're free, that people believe that they're free.
Yeah.
But we've lost a lot of it, such that now I think that this is my conclusion from the few things you were saying. During the 70s and 80s, Britain was more free in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of movement, say going out of the country, than Soviet Union. In terms of freedom of access to education, etc., it was about the same, except for, from what you say, I think the standard of education wasn't as good in Britain. But the standard wasn't good, but the freedom to access it.
Yeah,
was.
and even still now, when my nephew and niece came to Britain, and my niece was startling the teachers in school, in grammar school we're talking about, they're saying, we can't teach her anything in maths and physics because she's like university level.
Yeah.
And she was only 15.
So the standards.
And that's after 90s, which ruined the Russian education.
Yeah.
It still was a good education. Some left, some of...
My impression, I was a teacher for quite a few years, was that the standard of education in Britain went down successively from decade to decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, to now. It's and there are various reasons for it, but partly it's ideological. The idea of comprehensive education, which treats all children the same, whereas children are of different abilities in reality. You should treat them differently. And that has had huge effects. And then it's then ramped up to almost a right to go to university.
Yeah.
So the standards had to be reduced.
Why they made it in order to occupy them, so there'll be not unemployment. Instead, they're paying their fees.
It was partly massaging the employment statistics. That's how I see it.
Yeah, it is.
But also, it was a way to get re-elected. it was like a good slogan.
Yeah.
I'm going to give education for all. And
But when I actually studied in British University, I was hugely disappointed, hugely, because I came there and I thought, when are they going to teach us? Look, one lecture per week, and one seminar per week.
what were you studying?
Art.
Oh, I didn't study art.
You know what? Okay, that's probably like extreme. Probably in other faculties a bit more. But in Russia,
I think,
it was like 40 hours, like solid teaching.
Well,
per
certainly
week.
is a different style of teaching. But in terms of I didn't do any sort of arts education, so I don't know what the difference is in Britain. So, I mean, I studied sciences, and we had to be in because we were doing experiments.
My ex-husband
in labs.
Yeah. My ex-husband is a lecturer, senior lecturer at university, and he's telling me how the standards are so dropping terribly compared to what he was.
The standards in science certainly dropped for the reason that I said, in that it sort of went on from the school to the lower standard in school. Therefore, to get into university, the standards were dropped because there was pressure for the universities to have more and more students in.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that. Of course, part of their funding comes from the government.
Yeah.
Now, this to me is terrible because I don't think. It's my personal opinion. It's a discussion for another time. I don't think the government should be involved in education at all because I think they're very bad at running almost everything. So I wouldn't have them involved because they seem to ruin everything. Our health service, for example, and the education system. And I would make the comparison. It's sort of going off on the side tangent here. I make the comparison with food distribution.
Food, it's another subject. We had more organic food.
Well, yeah, but I'm just
because here's just like crazy because everything. I don't know what to buy because everywhere is.
Well, before we, I'll ask you about that comparison in a minute. But just to finish my thought, you don't get the government to distribute your food in Britain.
No, yeah.
Supermarkets do it, and they do it a lot better than the NHS and the education system, both run by the government. So just as direct comparison, this is my observation.
Yeah.
The government, maybe it's just the British government, but the government does things very badly. So I would get them out of it and get someone else to run it. But let's go back to our comparison. I started down a summary of saying all the different areas, but we hadn't really covered. We didn't cover food distribution at all when we talked about access to things that you need. We talked about education and health.
Food-wise, of course, we had shortages.
Yeah,
and people had to queue for some salami or grapes or bananas, whatever. If they were at that time probably here too. The food was more seasonal.
At that time, yes.
We had like tangerines only like a equivalent of Christmas. We didn't have Christmas. We had New Year's celebration, which is still more valued than Christmas in Russia,
right.
because of tradition. Because communists destroyed the Christmas, but they made exactly equivalent of it at New Year's celebration.
You need a festival at that time. But yes, if you were to compare Britain then with the Soviet Union, then yes, we had more seasonal foods, and the food distribution, international food distribution, wasn't up to the standard that it is today. And the big supermarkets were really just starting then in the 80s. And setting up out of town, and you had to drive there and you had a big supermarket. That sort of culture was coming in. And as they became more popular, because of the economy of scale, they could bring in food from anywhere in the world, anytime. But that's now. So now, are we better off now? We're comparing Britain today than Soviet Union. Do we have better access to food now? Or you would say
well,
no?
You have more variety of food.
Yes.
Definitely. But if you go to Russia now, like right now, they're exactly the same, if not more. But
right now, but we're not making that comparison.
Yeah, but compared to Soviet Union, we had all the basic things.
Yes.
We didn't have like shortage of like I never remember being hungry. Like when I came here, my sister-in-law asked me, Albina, did you have enough food in Russia? Did you have bread? I just like startled. I thought, what on earth she's talking about?
We had the people in the West certainly had the impression that there were big lines queuing up.
There
for
were
bread.
queues for certain foods. There was some certain, but basically bread or
Who ran the
butter.
shops?
Or...
Were they local businesses or was
No,
it,
it was all government. Everything,
government?
government organized. And in the area where I lived, because it's north kind of Sakhalin Island, where it's winter from September till May, we had apples through the year from Korea. So
well, okay.
we had also our own provision. Everyone had their allotments. So potatoes.
So were there no local shops? I mean, did you have to
we
buy
had
from
we
them?
had a local.
There were local shops as well. As
Of course we had local shops, but they were basic food. It was like tins of fish.
No, I mean local businesses.
Oh,
rather than government.
Oh, no.
Was there any food shop?
No, we didn't have
shops?
any businesses at those days.
There were no businesses at all because it was
businesses. That's when other things were in Russia wasn't encouraged.
Yes.
Even though when these shortages were, some people bought a lot of stuff, and they did like a secret, clandestine kind of business.
Yes, I'm. Now this bit, I'm not. I think because it's a bit unfair. We're comparing Britain today with Soviet Union then, but I think we're better off with the food today. That's all I'm going to say. It's today in Britain than Soviet Union, Russia.
Better off in terms of variety. And access to variety, but in terms of quality, I'm not sure about it because I met. When I was living in Moscow, a French lady, she said to me, "Your apples here are so excellent." I said, "What? You don't have good apples in France?" I was surprised, and she said, "No, but they're all artificially
they're artificially grown. They're
sprayed with stuff in
ethene. I think.
Yeah, and she said, "Here you might have a worm in your apple, but it's natural, It's just
a natural worm.
And she said it tastes differently. She said,
Well, with a worm in it, will. So that's that. So we've made our full comparison now. I was trying to go a summary before. So which is we went through the different freedoms, education. It depends. Quality in Soviet Union probably better, but the freedom of access was about the same. That you had much the same, much to the surprise, I think, of my listeners.
Yeah, but for
to
children,
most things, there's a lot of freedom that people thought wasn't there. You have been listening to Albina Koumirova in conversation with Peter Timothy Cooper. Thanks for listening. Let's talk again in the next episode.